At a grocery store, a female cashier was working diligently to pay the rent that was coming due. But in the middle of a crowded store, she suddenly saw an elderly woman panic and scream in fear, drawing everyone's attention. Even though she was forbidden to leave her register, the cashier rushed over, knelt beside the elderly woman, and softly began singing a familiar hymn. Something miraculous happened. Within just a few minutes, the elderly woman calmed down, unaware that someone was quietly standing nearby watching everything, and that this brave act would change the cashier's life forever. Before we continue, tell us what time it is and where you're watching from. Subscribe and hype because tomorrow I've got something extra special for you. The automatic doors of Henderson's grocery slid open with their usual mechanical groan, releasing a wave of refrigerated air into the humid Dallas afternoon. It was June 18, 2024, a Thursday that felt like any other until it wasn't. David Thompson stepped through, his leather briefcase in one hand, the other gripping his mother's frail arm with practiced gentleness. At 75, Eleanor Thompson had once been formidable, a corporate lawyer who commanded courtrooms with her sharp wit and sharper tongue, who'd argued cases before circuit courts and won more often than she'd lost. Now she moved slowly, her silver hair carefully styled but her eyes clouded with confusion that came and went like fog rolling across a landscape. "Where are we?" Eleanor asked for the third time in 10 minutes, her voice small and uncertain, so different from the commanding tone that had once silenced courtrooms. "Just picking up a few things, Mama," David said softly, guiding her toward a shopping cart. He was 42, tall and lean, with the same strong jawline his mother once had. His navy suit jacket was slung over the cart handle, his white shirt sleeves rolled up. The CEO of Thomson Technologies looked more like a tired son today, which was closer to the truth than most people knew. At Register 4, Keisha Johnson was in the middle of her 6th hour of an 8-hour shift, her feet aching in cheap sneakers with a sole that was starting to separate. She scanned items with mechanical efficiency, beep, bag, smile, repeat, while her mind ran through calculations that never came out right. Rent due in 4 days, $900. Money in checking account, $857. Grandma Ruth's blood pressure medication, already 3 days overdue, $75. Her car's grinding brake sound that the mechanic said was dangerous, at least $300 she didn't have. The math was simple and brutal. Even if she skipped the medication and risked her grandmother's health, she was still $43 short on rent. And her landlord had been clear last month, one more late payment, and Keisha was out. 26 years old, and this was her life. Counting pennies, choosing between medicine and rent, taking online classes she was too exhausted to absorb. 3 years at Henderson's, working her way up from part-time bagger to full-time cashier, and she was still one emergency away from homelessness. The store buzzed with late-afternoon shoppers, fluorescent lights humming overhead like wasps. Her manager, Mr. Holloway, prowled between the registers like a corrections officer, his eyes sharp for any infraction. Keisha had been written up twice this month already, once for humming, his eye is on the sparrow, while scanning groceries, once for spending an extra 4 minutes helping Mr. Patterson, who had Parkinson's, carry his bags to his car. "This is a business, Johnson, not a charity," Holloway had said, his finger jabbing the air between them. "One more write-up and you're terminated. Do you understand?" She'd understood. She understood that empathy was expensive when you were poor, that kindness had to be rationed like everything else, that helping people was a luxury she couldn't afford. But then she heard it, a woman's voice rising in panic from somewhere near the produce section. "Jonathan, I can't find the car, where did we park?" Keisha's hand stilled on a can of soup, frozen mid-scan. She knew that sound. She'd heard it dozens of times at Sunset Manor, the nursing home where she volunteered every Tuesday evening, the only night she didn't work a double shift or attend online classes. The specific pitch of fear and disorientation that came with dementia, with a mind that had slipped its moorings and was drifting in dark water. She looked at her line, 4 customers deep, the woman at the front unloading a cart full of groceries, at least 15 minutes of work. She looked at Holloway. He was at register 2, his back to her, but he'd notice if she left. He always noticed. One more write-up. Termination, no paycheck, no rent, no medication for Grandma Ruth. The woman's voice came again, higher now, edged with real terror. "Please, someone help me find Jonathan." Keisha's chest tightened. She thought about Grandma Ruth 3 days after her first stroke, sitting in her chair at 2 in the morning, crying because she couldn't remember how to get to the bathroom, couldn't remember where she was, couldn't remember if Keisha was real or a dream. Keisha had held her grandmother's hands and sung Amazing Grace until the fear drained from her eyes, until she came back to herself enough to know she was safe. She thought of Mrs. Patterson at Sunset Manor, gripping her arm with surprising strength, eyes wild with panic. "Where's my son?" she'd cried, her son dead for 20 years, but the loss raw and immediate. Keisha had sung His Eye is on the Sparrow, and slowly the woman's breathing steadied, her grip loosened, the present returning note by note. The price of walking away from her register was everything she couldn't afford to lose. But the price of not walking away was something else entirely. "Ma'am," Keisha said to the customer in front of her, and her voice sounded strange to her own ears, steady when her hands were shaking. "I'm so sorry, but there's an emergency. I'll be right back." The customer's face pinched with irritation. "Are you serious? I've been waiting." "I know, I'm sorry." Keisha was already moving, her badge swinging against her chest, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. She knew what this meant. She knew Holloway would see her empty register, would see the line of frustrated customers, would know immediately that she'd abandoned her post. Again, this wasn't helping an elderly man with his groceries. This was walking away in the middle of a shift. This was the third strike, but that voice kept crying out, and Keisha's feet kept moving, and she realized with something like clarity that she'd made her choice before she even knew she was choosing, that there were some things she couldn't walk away from, even when walking away would save her. She'd learned that from Grandma Ruth, who'd taken in an 8-year-old girl when her own daughter went to prison, even though it meant working 2 jobs and giving up retirement. Who'd said, when Keisha was old enough to understand the sacrifice, "Baby girl, some things you do because they're right, not because they're easy. That's what it means to be human." Keisha had thought she understood, but understanding and living it were different things. She rounded the corner to the produce section, and saw them immediately, a well-dressed man in an expensive suit trying to calm an elderly woman who was pulling away from him, her face crumpled with fear. The woman was so small, so fragile-looking in her cream-colored cardigan that hung loose on her thinning frame. Her hands fluttered uselessly near her face like trapped birds. Tears streamed down her weathered cheeks, her eyes wild and unfocused, seeing something, some terror, that no one else could see. Other shoppers gave them wide berth, eyes averted, the way people always looked away from things that made them uncomfortable. The woman was trying to run on unsteady legs, and the man was trying to hold her without hurting her, and both of them looked like they were drowning in the middle of a crowded store while everyone pretended not to notice. The woman's mouth opened, another panicked cry building, and Keisha saw her whole body trembling, saw the way she'd started rocking slightly, a self-soothing motion that wasn't working. This wasn't just confusion, this was pure terror, this was someone lost in a nightmare they couldn't wake from. Keisha didn't think, she just opened her mouth and let the song come. In the sweet by and by, her voice was soft, barely above a hum, but something in the melody cut through the noise. The woman's wild eyes flickered toward her. "We shall meet on that beautiful shore." It was an old hymn, one from the woman's generation, one that Keisha sang with the elderly residents at Sunset Manor. She moved slowly, carefully, the way she'd learned. Never approach too fast, never crowd, let the music arrive before you do. She knelt down at a respectful distance, still singing softly, and when she finished the verse, she spoke in that same melodic tone, letting her voice rise and fall like song. "Ma'am, it's okay, you're safe. My name is Keisha. I know the lights are bright, I know there's too much noise, but you're safe right here. Can you see my hands?" The woman stared, chest heaving, mascara streaking down her face, but Keisha could see the melody working, creating space between panic and thought, opening a door that had slammed shut. Keisha held up both hands, palms out, and began moving them in gentle flowing patterns, something between conducting and dancing, movements that matched the rhythm of the hymn. "Let's breathe together, okay, nice and slow. In with me." She raised her hands slowly, while inhaling audibly, making it a performance the woman could mirror, and out. She lowered them with a long controlled exhale. The woman's breathing began to match, though her whole body still shook. Up, down, up, down. Her shoulders dropped slightly, her hands stilled their frantic flutter. Keisha tilted her head, that thing she'd been able to do since she was 6 years old, listening not to sound but to the emotional pitch of a person, the frequency of their fear. She heard this woman's frequency now, high and tight, all terror and disorientation, and knew exactly what she needed. Keisha began humming again, a different song this time. What a friend we have in Jesus, slow and warm, a melody that had comforted generations. She gently reached for the woman's trembling hands, which were ice cold despite the summer heat, and guided them through those same flowing motions, touch and melody and rhythm all working together. The man, the woman's son, Keisha assumed from the resemblance, stood frozen, watching with something like awe and desperate hope on his exhausted face. After several long moments, the woman's breathing steadied. She looked at Keisha with sudden clarity, her eyes focusing, the terror receding like a tide. A single sob escaped her throat, not fear this time, but relief. "You have a beautiful voice," the woman said, her tone almost conversational, though tears still wet her cheeks. "Perfect pitch. I used to know someone with perfect pitch." Keisha smiled gently, still holding the woman's hands. "Thank you. You're right, it's a gift I was born with. My grandmother says it means I can hear people's hearts." "I used to sing," the woman said, her voice soft and wondering, like she was remembering something precious. "In the church choir, when I was a girl in Birmingham, we sang that hymn every Sunday." Before she faltered, losing the thread, confusion clouding her features again. "Before is okay," Keisha said gently, squeezing her hands. "Right now is okay too. Music is powerful, isn't it? It helps us remember who we are, even when everything else gets confusing." The woman nodded, a fresh tear sliding down her weathered cheek. Yes, exactly that. I was so scared. I couldn't remember, I couldn't find." Her voice broke. "I know," Keisha said, "but you're safe now, you're okay." For a moment there was peace. The store noise seemed to recede. The woman held Keisha's hands and breathed steadily, no longer drowning, her trembling finally subsiding. Then a voice shattered everything. "Johnson, what the hell do you think you're doing?" Keisha's stomach dropped. She'd known this was coming, the moment she left her register, but hearing Holloway's fury made the reality hit like a physical blow. She stood slowly, still holding the elderly woman's hand, and turned to face her manager. His face was purple with rage, a vein throbbing visibly in his temple. His eyes were small and mean and fixed on her with the kind of fury that came from someone whose authority had been questioned. "You abandoned your station," he said, his voice tight and dangerous. "Again. Do you know how many customers are waiting? Do you have any idea what you've just cost this store?" "Mr. Holloway, this woman was having a medical emergency. That's not your job." The words came out like bullets. "Your job is to scan groceries and bag items and smile at customers. That's it. You're not a doctor, you're not a therapist, you're a cashier who can't follow basic instructions." He gestured dismissively at Eleanor, who flinched at his sharp tone. "If she's having a medical problem, that's what 911 is for. This is a grocery store, not a hospital." Keisha felt heat rising in her face, felt the familiar burn of humiliation that came from being dismissed, being reduced to just her job title. She needed help, she was terrified. Then she should have stayed home or gone to a proper facility where people are trained to deal with this. Holloway turned to the man in the expensive suit, his voice instantly shifting to obsequious. "Sir, I apologize profusely for this employee's behavior. She's been warned repeatedly about this kind of unprofessional conduct. Wandering off, singing to customers, acting like she works for a charity instead of a business. This will be dealt with immediately. I assure you she'll be terminated." "Stop," the man said quietly. Holloway blinked, his ingratiating smile faltering. "I'm sorry, I said stop talking." The man's voice was soft, but carried unmistakable authority, the kind that made Holloway's face go from purple to red to pale, in rapid succession. He looked at Keisha, really looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes, desperation and hope and bone-deep exhaustion. "What's your name?" "Keisha. Keisha Johnson." He looked at his mother, who was still holding Keisha's hand, still humming the melody Keisha had sung, her face peaceful now instead of terrified. Then he pulled out his wallet, and extracted a business card with thick expensive paper. He held it out to her. "You don't work here anymore," he said. "You work for me." The words didn't make sense at first. Keisha stared at the card, at the raised lettering, "David Thompson, CEO, Thompson Technologies. I'm offering you a position as my mother's care companion," he continued, and his voice was steady but she could hear the need underneath it, the desperation of someone who tried everything and failed. "Full-time, benefits, health insurance, dental, vision, retirement. Salary negotiable, but I guarantee it's significantly more than you're making here. Keisha's mind went blank. Then it started racing. This was insane. This was a wealthy stranger making an impulsive decision because she'd done one good thing. This couldn't be real, but it was also money. Real money. Maybe enough to not choose between rent and medication. Maybe enough to fix her car. Maybe enough to finish her degree someday. What if he changed his mind tomorrow? What if she quit Henderson's and found herself unemployed with no reference, nothing? Sir, she started, her voice smaller than she wanted. I appreciate the offer, but I don't have certification. I'm not a nurse or a therapist. I took care of my grandmother after her stroke, and I volunteer at a nursing home sometimes, but I never finished my associate's degree. I don't have formal training for this. The last part hurt to say out loud. Another failure to add to the list. I've hired 5 certified professionals in the past 3 years, David Thompson said, and something in his voice made her look at him more carefully. She saw exhaustion in his eyes, defeat, desperate hope. Nurses with impressive credentials, occupational therapists from prestigious programs, even a music therapist with a master's degree from Berkeley. None of them lasted more than a month. My mother refused to cooperate with them. She'd fight, scream, throw things. He paused, his voice roughening. What you just did in 3 minutes, that's more than 3 years of professional care accomplished. That's a miracle, and I'm not letting that walk away. Keisha's throat tightened. She looked at the elderly woman, Eleanor, she'd learn later, who was watching her with clear, grateful eyes, looking so small and vulnerable in her oversized cardigan. Then she looked at Holloway, whose face had gone through another color change. She thought about 3 years of his condescension, of being told to smile more, work faster, stop singing, stop being human. She thought about Grandma Ruth, waiting for medication Keisha couldn't afford to send. She thought about her apartment with its water-stained ceiling, and how she'd probably lose it this month anyway. She thought about the residents at Sunset Manor, how their faces transformed when she played piano for them. And she thought about this moment right here. She could say no, play it safe, keep her minimum wage job, and probably still lose everything when the next emergency came. Or she could say yes to something terrifying that might fail spectacularly, but might also be the chance she'd been praying for. But she wasn't foolish. She'd learned that much from poverty. I need it in writing, she heard herself say, her voice stronger now. She met David Thompson's eyes. A contract, salary, benefits, job security clauses, and she swallowed hard, forced herself to continue. I need an advance. My rent is due in 4 days and I'm $43 short. My grandmother needs blood pressure medication that costs $75. If you're serious about this, if this isn't just a moment of gratitude you'll regret tomorrow, then I need to know I won't be homeless in 3 weeks if it doesn't work out. She waited for him to laugh, to realize what he was offering, to take it back. Rich people didn't just hire grocery store cashiers to take care of their mothers. But David Thompson nodded slowly, something like respect crossing his face. Fair, my lawyer will have a contract ready by tomorrow morning. Give me your bank information, and I'll wire an advance tonight, $1,500. Enough to cover a month's rent and your grandmother's medications. Call it a signing bonus. Keisha's eyes burned. $1,500. She couldn't remember the last time she'd had that much money at once. And if you decide in a week this was a mistake, she asked, because she needed to know the worst case, then the advance is yours to keep, no strings attached. And I'll pay you 3 months severance, enough time to find something else. He paused. But Keisha, I've been watching people try to reach my mother for 3 years. I know what failure looks like. What you just did, that was success. That was exactly what she needs. Holloway made a strangled sound. You can't just poach my employees. There are labor laws. Miss Johnson is free to decline my offer, David said without looking at him. But if she accepts, I'll compensate Henderson's for any inconvenience, including paying out her final 2 weeks. Keisha looked at her name tag. 3 years of her life, reduced to a plastic rectangle. 3 years of barely surviving while dreaming of something more. She thought about what Grandma Ruth had said. Baby girl, some people are so afraid of their own smallness, they try to make everyone around them small too. Don't let them. You got something special, And she thought about Eleanor's hand in hers, the way the terror had drained from her eyes when Keisha sang, the peace that had settled over her features. The price of saying yes was risk. The price of saying no was the slow death of hope. "When do I start?" she asked, and her voice didn't shake. Relief flooded David Thompson's face. "Monday? That gives you the weekend to handle anything you need." "Monday," Keisha agreed. She turned to Holloway and carefully unclipped her name tag. She'd worn it for 3 years. It had her employee number on the back, 77,843. She set it in Holloway's palm. "I'll finish my shift today," she said, because she'd been raised to finish what she started. "You can mail my final check." "You're making a mistake," Holloway said, his voice tight with anger and something else, maybe fear that other employees would see this, would realize they had options. "You'll be back here begging for your job in a month." Keisha looked at him and felt something like pity. "Maybe I will, but at least I'll know I tried. At least I'll know I took a chance on myself." She turned back to David Thompson. "I'll call you tonight, about the contract. I'll be waiting." As they walked toward the exit, Eleanor between them, still humming softly, her steps steady now instead of panicked, Keisha felt the weight of what she'd just done settling over her. She'd quit her job. She'd bet everything on a stranger's promise. She'd chosen risk over safety. She was either brave or the biggest fool alive, and she wouldn't know which until it was too late to go back. Other shoppers stepped aside to let them pass. Some smiled. One elderly woman applauded. A younger woman with a toddler called out, "Good for you, honey." In the parking lot, as David helped his mother into a Mercedes that probably cost more than Keisha would earn in 5 years, Eleanor turned back, her face soft with gratitude. "Will you sing for me again?" she asked, her voice clear and present, her eyes still showing traces of the fear that had consumed her just minutes ago. Keisha smiled, tears spilling over. "Anytime you want, Mama Eleanor. Anytime at all." As the Mercedes pulled away, Keisha stood in the parking lot, with her phone in her hand, shaking so hard she could barely hold it. She had calls to make, to Grandma Ruth, to her landlord, to anyone who could tell her she hadn't just made the worst decision of her life. But first she let herself feel it, the terror and the exhilaration, the grief of leaving something known and the hope of moving towards something better. She looked at the business card, at the elegant script that promised a future she'd never dared imagine, and she thought about what Grandma Ruth always said, "The Lord puts opportunities in your path, baby, but you gotta be brave enough to take them." This was the work, this was the faith, this was her choosing to believe she was worth more than survival. For the first time in 3 years of grinding poverty and deferred dreams, Keisha Johnson let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, taking a chance on herself wasn't foolish. Maybe it was the smartest, bravest thing she'd ever done. She looked back at Henderson's grocery one last time, at the place that had kept her fed but never satisfied, that had paid her just enough to stay poor. Then she turned away and started walking toward her car, toward the weekend she'd spend preparing for Monday, toward a future that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. She was done just surviving. It was time to see if she could actually live. The gates opened to reveal a sprawling estate in Highland Park, all clean lines and warm stone, framed by ancient oak trees that had watched a century of Dallas history unfold. Keisha sat in the passenger seat of David's Mercedes, forcing herself to breathe steadily. 2 days had passed since the grocery store, 2 days of phone calls, a formal background check she'd been terrified wouldn't clear because of her mother's criminal record, a contract she'd read 3 times to be sure it was real, and a salary offer so unreal she'd called her grandmother 4 times just to hear someone confirm she wasn't dreaming. "This is where you live?" she asked, immediately regretting the obviousness of the question. The house looked like something from a magazine, a place so far removed from her childhood home, a shotgun house in South Memphis with peeling paint and a leaky roof, that it felt unreal. "It's where we exist," David said as he guided the car up the circular drive past manicured gardens that likely required a full-time staff. Something in his tone made her look at him differently. "There's a difference between living and existing. We've been existing for a long time." Inside the house was beautiful but hollow. High ceilings, carefully neutral walls, expensive art positioned just so. Everything immaculate, curated, museum perfect. It felt less like a home than a photograph of one impressive, distant, untouched by daily life. A housekeeper named Rosa greeted them, her smile warm but edged with fatigue. She was in her 50s, sturdy with kind eyes that had seen too much sorrow. "Miss Eleanor is in the sunroom," she said, her accent soft and musical. "She's been asking for Thomas today." Her brother David explained quietly as they walked. "He died in Vietnam in 1968. She was 15 when they got the telegram. She didn't talk about it much before. Now she asks for him at least once a week." They found Eleanor seated in a wicker chair, sunlight pouring through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a garden in full bloom. She stared at her hands with an expression of deep confusion, as if trying to remember what they were for. When she looked up, her face flickered through fear, uncertainty, then softened, not with recognition, but with a sense of safety. "Oh," she said when she saw Keisha, the singing girl, "you came back. I thought maybe I dreamed you." Keisha smiled, and took a seat across from her, close enough to be present but careful not to crowd. "I'm real. My name is Keisha. I'm going to spend some time with you, if that's all right. Keep you company." Eleanor studied her closely, eyes sharp despite the fog. "You're not trying to trick me?" "No, ma'am." "Good." Eleanor relaxed, shoulders easing. "People try to trick me now. They smile and nod and talk to me like I'm a child. Tell me everything's fine when I can feel that it's not." Her voice trembled. "It's like drowning while everyone on the shore keeps saying you're swimming just fine, but I'm drowning. I know I am." Keisha leaned forward, her voice steady and respectful. "I won't pretend. If you're confused, I'll tell you gently what's real. If you're scared, I'll sit with you through it. And if you're angry, I won't take it personally. But I won't treat you like you're broken or less than who you are. Deal?" Tears filled Eleanor's eyes, tears of recognition, of finally being seen. "Deal." In the corner of the sunroom stood a grand piano, draped in cloth like furniture in a house waiting to be sold. Keisha noticed Eleanor's gaze drawn to it again and again, her fingers twitching faintly as if remembering long-forgotten patterns. "Do you play?" Keisha asked softly. "I used to," Eleanor said. 12 years of lessons. My mother insisted. I hated the scales at first, but then I realized I could play anything I heard, just once." She looked down at her hands, betrayal flickering across her face. "Now they can't even button my shirt most days. Would you like to hear some music?" Eleanor nodded, almost eagerly. Keisha approached the piano and removed the cloth with a careful, reverent motion. It was a Steinway, clearly maintained despite long silence. She tested the keys, then closed her eyes briefly, not just listening to sound, but to the room itself, to the mix of fear, grief and fragile hope hanging in the air. She began with "What a Wonderful World." Her voice rose clear and sure, filling the sunroom, pushing back the stillness like light. Each note landed precisely, but what mattered more was how she shaped the song, letting emotion live in the pauses, making something familiar feel newly intimate. David watched from the doorway, his throat tightening. 8 months earlier, he'd hired a highly credentialed music therapist. She'd lasted 3 sessions before Eleanor threw a book at her and refused to see her again. Now his mother was crying softly, swaying in her chair, mouthing half-remembered lyrics, her face transformed by something dangerously close to joy. When the song ended, Eleanor pressed her hands to her chest, smiling through tears. "Again," she whispered. Keisha played Somewhere Over the Rainbow, then Unchained Melody, then Georgia on My Mind. Each time she paused first, listening for what was needed. By the end, Eleanor had moved closer, watching Keisha's hands with wonder, occasionally reaching out to touch a key herself, testing whether sound would still answer her. When it was time for Eleanor's afternoon rest, Keisha helped her upstairs. The bedroom was immaculate and impersonal. Everything necessary, nothing lived in. "Will you be here when I wake up?" Eleanor asked as Keisha adjusted her pillows. "I will, I promise." "And will you sing?" "Whenever you want." Eleanor reached up and gently traced Keisha's face. "You have a gift," she said with sudden clarity. "Not just talent, gift is what you give. Don't forget that." After Eleanor fell asleep, Keisha found David in his study, staring at a desk of untouched papers. "She responded to you," he said quietly. "In 3 years of doctors and specialists, no one has reached her like that. Music accesses parts of the brain memory can't," Keisha replied, taking in the degrees lining the walls, the family photos that stopped abruptly 3 years ago. "My grandmother had a stroke, lost most of her speech, but she could still sing every hymn she learned as a child. Music lives somewhere deeper. David nodded slowly, something shifting behind his eyes. For the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel entirely hollow. "Where did you learn to play like that?" David asked. "That wasn't just technique." "Church," Keisha said with a small smile. "My grandmother raised me after my mother went to prison. We didn't have money, but church needed musicians. I started playing at 6, leading services by 12. She hesitated. "I have perfect pitch. But more than that, I can feel the emotional pitch of a room when something's out of tune, and how to bring it back." David studied her. "That's exactly what she needs." "I'll do everything I can," Keisha said. "But I can't stop the disease. I can give her moments of peace. That's all." "I know," David said softly. They stood in silence, the beginning of something neither had planned. "Get some rest," he said finally. "Rosa will show you your room. Thank you for saying yes." Over the following 2 weeks, Keisha learned Eleanor's rhythms the way a musician learns a complex piece, through patience, observation, and the understanding that structure and improvisation mattered equally. Mornings were best. Some days Eleanor woke fully present, asking for coffee and the newspaper, commenting sharply on current events, or recalling details from decades past with startling clarity. Those mornings were gifts, brief, luminous, impossible to predict. Keisha learned to savor them without trying to hold on too tightly. Mid-mornings were ideal for focus. That's when they walked the garden, Eleanor naming every flower even when she couldn't remember the year. Her botanical knowledge remained intact. Keisha would read the paper aloud, and Eleanor would listen, ask questions, engage. Afternoons were harder. Confusion crept in, sometimes abruptly. Eleanor would forget where she was, search for parents and siblings long dead, insist she needed to prepare for trials, finished decades ago, or pick up children, who were now middle-aged adults. Fear followed confusion, sometimes agitation. But music could pull her back when words failed. When Eleanor began to spiral, Keisha sang, sometimes at the piano, sometimes just humming while holding her hands. She learned which songs worked best: hymns from church, standards from the 40s and 50s, Motown from the 60s, songs from when Eleanor had been young, vital, newly in love. Rhythm mattered too. When language collapsed entirely, Keisha used touch and motion, moving Eleanor's hands gently, tapping steady beats, tracing invisible patterns in the air. Rhythm, touch and melody formed a language beyond words, bypassing damaged cognition and reaching something deeper. They established routines because Eleanor needed them. Morning walks at 8, always the same path. Piano at 10, Eleanor humming, or letting her hands rest over Keisha's as muscle memory guided her fingers. Lunch at noon, always the same seat. Afternoons were quiet, sometimes silence, sometimes poetry. Langston Hughes, Maya Angelou, Dunbar, Dove. The cadence soothed Eleanor in ways prose never could. Evenings were Eleanor's favorite. As the house quieted, Keisha played, and sometimes Eleanor joined her at the piano, fingers remembering patterns her mind had forgotten. Those moments were magic, brief windows when the disease loosened its grip. David watched from a distance. He came home around 7, asked Rosa about Eleanor's day, checked in with Keisha, but kept himself separate, as if afraid proximity would shatter the fragile peace, or force him to feel what he was losing. 2 weeks in, on a quiet Friday night, Keisha found him alone in his study, bourbon untouched, staring at a photograph of Eleanor in her judicial robes. "She had a good day," Keisha said gently. "She remembered your name at dinner, gave you advice about that merger. She was sharp for 20 minutes. "That's good," David said, hollow. Keisha stepped inside. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why do you stay away from her?" The question hung heavy. David stiffened. "I'm working. Someone has to keep things running. The company runs itself," Keisha said calmly. "That's not the real reason." "You don't understand, then help me understand, because you don't have much time left with her. Maybe months, not long." "I know that," David exploded, then turned to the window, shoulders rigid. Finally the truth broke through. "Every time I look at her, I see what I've lost. She was brilliant, the smartest person I knew. She taught me everything about integrity, strategy, courage. She argued cases, mentored judges, shaped civil rights law. She mattered. She still matters, Keisha said softly. Does she? David turned, eyes wet. She doesn't know who I am half the time. She calls me her brother, her husband, her father, everyone but her son. Do you know what that feels like? I can't imagine, but I want my mother back, he said, breaking, and I'm never getting her back. So you're grieving, Keisha said, while she's still alive, and you're hiding from it. David sagged. I don't know how to do this without falling apart. Then fall apart, she said gently. You're allowed to. Grief comes in waves, it doesn't drown you if you let it move. She squeezed his arm. You need this time with her. When she's gone, you don't want to realize you hid. David studied her. How did you get so wise? Keisha smiled sadly. Life made me grow up fast. My mother went to prison when I was 8. My grandmother raised me. When she had a stroke, I was 23. Doctors said she'd never recover. I brought her home. Learned to reach her through music. That's where this comes from. That's where I learned showing up matters more than anything. She paused. Your mother needs you present. Not perfect, just present. David nodded. I can try. That night, for the first time in months, he joined Eleanor for tea. He didn't correct her when she called him Jonathan. He listened, and it hurt less than he expected. Keisha watched from the hallway, warmth blooming in her chest. This was why she'd said yes, not for money or comfort, but for moments like this. Purpose, she realized, didn't arrive loudly. It showed up quietly, and asked if you were brave enough to say yes. That first night in her small room off the kitchen, Keisha couldn't sleep immediately despite her exhaustion. She sat on the narrow bed with her laptop open, the glow illuminating her face in the darkness. The $1,500 had hit her account that morning. She checked 3 times to make sure it was real. She logged into her bank account now, and began the work of untangling her life. $900 to her landlord for rent, paid in full, on time, for the first time in over a year. She could almost hear the relief in her landlord's voice when she'd called to confirm. She opened the pharmacy website, and wired $75 directly to the location near Grandma Ruth's house in Memphis, adding a note, for blood pressure meds, more coming every month. I love you. $200 to the mechanic as a deposit. He'd said he could fix the brakes for $500 total. She'd pay the rest from her first paycheck. She stared at what remained, $250, more money than she'd had in her account in 6 months, maybe longer. On impulse, she transferred $50 to savings, the first time she'd saved anything since Grandma Ruth's stroke 3 years ago. The act felt almost defiant, like planting a flag on territory she'd never been allowed to claim. For the first time since she was 8 years old, and her mother went to prison, Keisha Johnson went to bed, not calculating which bill to skip, which need to defer, which small emergency would destroy everything. She went to bed thinking about tomorrow, about Eleanor, about work that mattered instead of work that just barely kept her alive. It felt like breathing after years underwater. Keisha's first paycheck arrived on a Friday morning in early July, direct deposited, while she was helping Eleanor with her morning walk through the garden. Her phone buzzed with the notification, and she glanced at it absently, then froze mid-step. $3,500, after taxes. Are you all right, dear? Eleanor asked, noticing her sudden stillness. Yes, Keisha said, her voice strange in her own ears. Yes, I'm fine. But she wasn't fine. She was shaking. That afternoon, when Eleanor was napping, Keisha sat in her car in the driveway and called her bank, certain there'd been a mistake. They confirmed the amount was correct. She sat there for 10 minutes, staring at the number on her screen, and cried. Then she got to work. $500 to Grandma Ruth, enough for 3 months of medication, and then some. She called her grandmother immediately. Baby girl, you didn't have to send so much, Grandma Ruth said, her voice thick with emotion. Yes, I did. You gave up your retirement for me. Worked 2 jobs. This is just the beginning of paying you back. You don't owe me nothing, Keisha. I know, but I want to anyway. $200 to finally pay off the defaulted student loan that had been destroying her credit for 2 years. $300 to the mechanic to finish the brake job. $50, reckless, extravagant, spent at a department store on new work clothes that actually fit, shoes, without separated soles, a jacket for when the air conditioning made the house cold. The rest went into savings. She watched the number climb, $435 saved. It wasn't much by most people's standards, but to Keisha it felt like wealth beyond measure. That evening, she stood in front of the bathroom mirror in her small room, wearing clothes that didn't come from a thrift store, and barely recognized herself. Not because she looked different, but because for the first time in her adult life, she looked like someone with a future instead of someone just surviving the present. She thought about the choice she'd made in Henderson's grocery, the risk, the terror, the leap of faith, and she thought about Grandma Ruth's words, "The Lord puts opportunities in your path, baby, but you gotta be brave enough to take them." She'd been brave, and for once, bravery had paid off. It was Keisha's idea to transform the sunroom into what she called a memory sanctuary. 3 weeks into her tenure, she approached David one evening with sketches and notes, explaining her vision with the focused intensity of someone who had found something worth fighting for. "Music therapy isn't just entertainment," she said, spreading papers across his desk. "It's about accessing memories through melody and rhythm when language and logic fail. There's real research showing that even advanced Alzheimer's patients respond to music from their youth. Musical memory often lasts longer than almost anything else." David leaned forward despite his exhaustion. "What do you need? A better sound system. One that plays vinyl. Your mother's generation grew up with records. The physical act of holding them, seeing the covers, can trigger memories more effectively than digital files." She pointed to another sketch. "I also want simple percussion instruments, drums, shakers, tambourines. Making music engages the brain differently than listening. It creates a feedback loop between movement and sound." "Okay, what else?" "Space to move. Not dancing, exactly, gentle rhythmic movement. Rhythm and motion are deeply connected in the brain, possibly older than language itself." She hesitated, then continued. "And I'd like to invite a few other people. There's a community day program, seniors with dementia. Your mother might respond better in a group. Humans are social creatures. Even when memory fades, connection still matters." David sat back. "You want to open my mother's home to strangers, just once a week, Tuesday afternoons. That's her best time. 2 or 3 people, carefully screened. Eleanor's world has become so small. Isolation isn't good for her. Music can be a bridge, between people, between who she was and who she still is." "You're sure about this?" "I am. I've seen it work. When I volunteered at Sunset Manor in Memphis, residents who barely responded to anything would come alive during music, singing, laughing, holding hands. Music cuts through the isolation dementia creates. It reminds people they're still human." David studied her, the certainty in her voice, the quiet urgency in her eyes. He thought about his mother, about how much she'd faded in 3 years, and how in just 3 weeks Keisha had brought more light into the house than he'd seen in months. "Do it," he said. "Whatever you need." Keisha blinked. Really, money isn't the issue. Use whatever helps, just help her feel human again." Keisha smiled, bright and unguarded, already seeing the room, not as it was, but as what it could become. Over the next week, the Thompson home transformed. A professional sound system was installed in the sunroom, speakers positioned for even, gentle coverage. Boxes of vinyl arrived, Motown, jazz, blues, gospel, soul, the soundtrack of Eleanor's youth. Custom shelving displayed the albums like invitations, each cover visible and touchable. The piano moved to the center of the room, chairs arranged in a welcoming semicircle. Simple percussion instruments filled a low table, tambourines, shakers, hand chimes, rhythm sticks, a warm-toned djembe. Keisha chose each one carefully, not just for sound, but for how it felt to hold, how it invited connection. She added photographs, working with David and Rosa to select images from Eleanor's life. They created a memory wall. Eleanor graduating from law school in 1976, Eleanor at the March on Washington, Eleanor sworn in as a circuit court judge, Eleanor holding baby David, her face radiant with love, each photo labeled, forming a timeline, a quiet declaration that this life had mattered. The first Tuesday session took place on July 9th. 3 guests arrived from the community center. Mr. James Hawthorne, 82, a retired postal worker who'd once sung doo-wop, still remembered harmony, though he'd forgotten his grandchildren's names. His daughter Sandra brought him, hope and doubt written on her face. Mrs. Patricia Reeves, 76, a former teacher who no longer recognized her children but could still sing every verse of Amazing Grace and quote books she'd taught decades earlier. And Mr. Carlton Moore, 70, a Vietnam veteran who rarely spoke anymore, though his wife said he still responded to music from the 60s. Eleanor was suspicious, clinging to Keisha's arm as the strangers entered. "Who are these people?" she whispered. "Is this a trick?" "They're friends," Keisha said gently. "They're here to make music with us." Eleanor allowed herself to be guided to a chair, sitting stiffly, watching. Keisha didn't push. She sat at the piano and began to play Ain't No Mountain High Enough. Something shifted. Mr. Hawthorne's face lit up. He moved to the percussion table and grabbed a tambourine, shaking it perfectly in time, his body remembering what his mind could not. Mrs. Reeves began to sing, every word clear and strong. Carlton tapped his foot, then swayed. His wife covered her mouth as tears streamed down her face, and Eleanor felt her fear ease. She picked up a small drum, tapping cautiously, then with confidence. Keisha transitioned to Stand By Me, and suddenly all of them were making music together, imperfect, joyful, alive. For 90 minutes, dementia loosened its grip. They weren't patients or problems, they were people, connected by rhythm and sound, doing what humans had always done, gathering to make music, to be present. When it ended, Mrs. Reeves clasped Keisha's hands, a flash of clarity in her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "I felt like myself today. I don't feel that way very often anymore." Keisha turned away, tears threatening. Sandra Hawthorne approached, eyes wet. "I haven't seen my father smile like that in over a year. Today he came back, even if just for an hour." Carlton's wife could barely speak. "He looked at me, really looked at me. It's been months since he's actually seen me." David, who had planned to work through the session, found himself unable to look away. He stood in the hallway, where he could see into the sunroom without intruding, telling himself he was only making sure everything went smoothly. But once the music started, he couldn't leave. He watched his mother smile, really smile, in ways he'd thought were gone forever. He watched her make eye contact, connect, share joy. He watched Keisha guide it all with the ease of someone who'd been doing this for decades, not a 26-year-old with no formal training. And something long dormant stirred in his chest, something that might have been hope. That evening, after Eleanor had gone to bed exhausted and content, David found Keisha in the kitchen making chamomile tea, a ritual she'd quietly established. "That was remarkable," he said, his voice thick. Keisha turned, surprised. "Your mother did great. She was really present today." "I wasn't talking about my mother." He leaned against the counter, studying her. "I was talking about you, what you created today. That wasn't just an activity, that was grace. Maybe, you created grace." Keisha smiled, ducking her head. "I just played some songs, don't diminish it. I watched those people come alive. I watched my mother connect with strangers in ways she hasn't connected with me in years." He paused. "Where did you learn to do that? To read a room like that?" "Church mostly, and necessity." She poured hot water over the tea bags, the familiar motion steadying her. "After my grandmother had her stroke, she became depressed, just sat in her chair, not really watching TV, not really living, so I started bringing people to her, neighbors, church friends. We'd sing together every Friday, nothing fancy, just people sharing music and stories." Slowly, she came back to herself. "Not all the way, but enough. That's when you realize this could be more than a hobby. That's when I realized music breaks through walls nothing else can." Keisha said, "It reaches places below language and memory, places where we're just rhythm and feeling and connection." "You should do this professionally," David said. "Open a center, train others. This is too important to keep small. I'd need credentials for that, licensing, funding, all the things that make it legitimate." She shook her head. "I'm just a grocery store worker who got lucky." "You're not just anything," David said firmly. "You're gifted. And if credentials are what you need, I'll pay for whatever training you want." Keisha studied him, recognizing the genuine desire beneath the offer, and the instinct to solve problems with resources. "That's generous."
but it changes things. If you pay for my education, I owe you, and I don't want our relationship built on debt, even generous debt. That's not but that's how I'd feel it, she said gently. What I need right now isn't tuition money, it's this. She gestured around the house. This space, a place to experiment, to learn what actually works. You've given me something more valuable than a degree, permission to build my own methodology. David nodded slowly. For the first time he understood that Keisha didn't need rescuing. She was charting her own course. Okay, he said. We'll do it your way, but when you're ready to take this bigger, I'm here, as an investor, a partner, whatever you need. Because what you're building matters. She smiled, warmth spreading through her. Thank you for seeing it. I believe in you, he said. The words lingered between them, weighted with meaning, neither was ready to name. 6 weeks into the Tuesday sessions, it was late August now, the Texas heat oppressive even with the air conditioning. The past arrived without warning. Keisha was setting up the sunroom, arranging instruments and cueing records, when Rosa appeared in the doorway, her face tight with worry. There's someone at the gate, she said quietly. A woman. She says she's Eleanor's daughter. Keisha straightened. David had never mentioned a sister. Does David know? He's on a conference call, but she's very insistent. She has ID. She says she's been calling for weeks, that no one is returning her messages. Eleanor, seated by the window, looked up with sudden alertness. Did you say Diane? You know her mama Eleanor? Keisha asked gently. Of course I know my daughter, Eleanor said sharply, a flash of the formidable woman she'd once been. Then confusion washed over her face. Where has she been? Is she hurt? Keisha's chest tightened. She found David in his study. The color drained from his face when she told him. Tell her I'm not available, he said, voice tight. David, she's your sister. And Eleanor recognized her name. I don't care. His voice hardened. Tell her to leave. She says she's been calling. That you're not returning her messages. That's because I have nothing to say to her. The words burst out. He stood abruptly, papers scattering. She walked away. Keisha, 3 years ago, when Mama was first diagnosed and terrified and asking for her, Diane said she couldn't handle it, said watching Mama decline would be too painful, so she left, changed her number, moved away. She abandoned us. People make terrible choices when they're scared.
She doesn't get to regret it now. David snapped, hands shaking. Do you know how many times Mama asked for her that first year? How many times I had to watch her cry because her daughter wasn't coming? Before Keisha could respond, the front door opened. Rosa protested. Footsteps echoed in the foyer. David strode out, fury radiating from him. Keisha closed behind. A woman stood in the entryway and the resemblance was unmistakable. Diane Thompson Hartwell, mid-40s, impeccably dressed, professional to the core. Eleanor's bone structure, her brother's sharp eyes, her makeup was careful, but her eyes were red, as if she'd been crying. You can't just walk into my house, David said quietly. It's Mama's house, Diane replied, voice shaking. Daddy built it for her. I have every right to see my mother. You lost that right when you walked away. I made a mistake, you made a choice. David's restraint shattered. When she needed family most, you disappeared. Do you have any idea what these years have been like? Diane flinched but didn't retreat. I was wrong. I know that. I was too afraid to face losing her. I ran and in running I lost her anyway. I'm here now because I can't live with that anymore. I want to try to make it right. It's too late. It's never too late to try. She doesn't remember you half the time. David shot back. And when she does, she remembers someone from 20 years ago. You'll be a stranger or worse, a ghost, then I'll be whatever she needs. Diane said, tears finally spilling. But I can't stay away anymore. I abandoned my mother when she needed me most and I have to at least try to face that. David, Keisha's voice cut through the storm, calm but firm. Both siblings turned toward her. Your mother is in the sunroom. She can hear us and she's getting agitated. Whatever you need to say to each other, maybe it shouldn't be here. Silence fell, thick with years of anger and regret. Finally Diane said softly, please, I know I don't deserve it, but let me see her, 10 minutes. If it upsets her I'll leave and never come back. I swear. David's jaw tightened, his fists clenched at his sides. Slowly he nodded. 10 minutes, he said. If you upset her in any way you're gone, and you don't come back. Understood. Understood. Eleanor stood at the window when they entered the sunroom, her posture tense, hands fluttering in that familiar way that signaled overwhelm. She turned at the sound of footsteps, her eyes moving across the room until they landed on Diane. For a long moment mother and daughter stared at each other. Then Eleanor's face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Diane?" she whispered. "Baby, is that you?" "Hi, Mama." Diane's composure shattered. She crossed the room, knelt, and took her mother's hands gently. I'm so sorry, I stayed away." Eleanor traced her daughter's face, the new lines, the gray in her hair. "You look tired. You always work too hard, just like your father." "Something like that, Mama." "Are you married?" "I can't remember. Divorced now." "That's too bad. You deserve someone good." Eleanor's expression shifted. Recognition, confusion, sadness. "Where have you been? I had so much to tell you, but it's all mixed up now." Diane pulled her into a careful hug, sobbing. "I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere." They stayed that way, reconciling across the fragile bridge of the moment. Keisha and David stood back, giving them space, though David's face tightened with anger, jealousy, and relief all at once. Then Eleanor pulled away, peering at Diane with gentle confusion. "I'm sorry, dear, but do I know you?" The window closed. The pain on Diane's face was raw, the kind that came from losing someone while they were still right in front of you. Keisha stepped forward. "Why don't I make some tea?" "Diane, you're welcome to stay for our afternoon music session. Your mother really responds to it. It might help you reconnect." Diane looked at Keisha properly for the first time, noticing the ease between her and Eleanor, the trust. Something flickered. Displacement, perhaps. "You must be the care companion David hired." "I'm Keisha. For how long?" "About 6 weeks, and you're qualified." The question wasn't hostile, but it carried an edge. Before David could respond, Keisha answered calmly, "Not with degrees or certifications, but I know what music calms her. I know she needs exactly 3 cups of coffee. I know when noise overwhelms her and when singing brings peace. I know she's afraid of forgetting, but more afraid of being treated like she no longer matters." She met Diane's eyes. "I love her, and she trusts me." Silence fell. Diane looked at her mother, now humming softly, "The moment gone. Does she ever remember us?" "Sometimes. Mornings are better. Certain songs, photographs, the memories are still there. They just need the right key." Diane swallowed. "Could you teach me how to reach her?" David stepped forward. "Diane?" "Yes," Keisha said gently. "Of course. Stay for the session. It's not complicated, it just takes patience and meeting her where she is." "You shouldn't have to teach her," David said sharply. She walked away. "That's not how forgiveness works," Keisha replied quietly. "Your mother knew who Diane was today. She was happy. That matters more than old wounds." David stiffened, then exhaled. He had seen the joy on his mother's face. "Fine," he said. "Stay for the session. Afterward, we talk." Diane nodded. "Thank you." The afternoon session was awkward at first. Diane sat stiffly in a corner chair, arms crossed, watching as Mr. Hawthorne, Mrs. Reeves, and Carlton arrived and settled into their familiar rhythm. She looked out of place in her expensive clothes and professional armor, surrounded by people who'd come to make music, not judgments. But when Keisha sat at the piano and began to play Lean on Me, something shifted, the defenses cracked. Eleanor perked up immediately, reaching for her tambourine with surprising speed. Carlton found the beat on his drum. Mrs. Reeves began to sing, every word perfect even though she could no longer remember her children's names. Slowly, almost despite herself, Diane moved closer. She picked up a small maraca, shaking it uncertainly, off rhythm but trying. Eleanor shuffled nearer until they stood side by side, both keeping time. Mother and daughter, strangers and intimates at once, connected by shared rhythm rather than memory. Keisha watched from the piano, her hands steady on the keys, warmth blooming in her chest. This was why the work mattered, not just for those with dementia, but for the families desperate to bridge the distance the disease created. When Keisha transitioned into What a Wonderful World, Eleanor's favorite, the elderly woman began to sing, her voice thin but true. Diane's tears fell freely as she listened, stunned by the beauty that still remained. 90 minutes later, Eleanor was tired but peaceful. As Keisha helped her settle for a nap, Eleanor reached for Diane's hand. "Will you come back?" she asked softly. "I like it when you're here. You make me feel safe." "I'll come back, Mama," Diane whispered. "I promise." "Good," Eleanor murmured as sleep claimed her. "Don't leave again." "I won't," Diane said, though her voice trembled. After the guests left, David and Diane stood in the foyer where they'd argued earlier, the anger drained away. "She seems happy," Diane said quietly. "That's because of Keisha," David replied. "She's given Mama back pieces of herself I thought were gone." "I can see that." Diane hesitated. "Why didn't you tell me it was this bad? Would you have come?" The question lingered. Finally, Diane said, "I don't know. Probably not. I was afraid, but I should have been here." "Yes," David said simply. "I want to help now," Diane continued. "If you'll let me." "It's not about deserve," David said. "It's about Mama. If you're serious, we need boundaries. You coordinate visits with Keisha, you don't disrupt her routine. And Keisha has final say about Mama's emotional well-being." "Understood," Diane said. "I'm not going anywhere." "We'll see," David replied. Showing up matters more than words. Later, David found Keisha in the kitchen sorting Eleanor's evening medication. "That was hard for you," Keisha said gently. "I'm not ready to forgive her." "You don't have to be," Keisha replied. "Forgiveness happens slowly, but your mother was happy today. That matters." "It does," David said quietly. He wanted to say more, to thank her, to name the way she'd held his family together, but the words didn't come. Keisha, sensing what he couldn't say, simply smiled and continued humming one of Eleanor's favorite songs, the melody filling the kitchen with quiet warmth. Diane kept her promise. She came Thursday afternoon, then again the following Tuesday for the music session, then Friday morning. Within 2 weeks she was visiting 5 days a week, slowly weaving herself back into Eleanor's life, even though Eleanor rarely recognized her as her daughter. At first it was awkward. David and Diane circled each other like wary animals, their conversations clipped and careful, their shared concern for Eleanor the only thing holding them together. But gradually something shifted. Keisha facilitated it without seeming to try. She asked Diane to help with small things, steadying Eleanor during walks, choosing records, preparing lunch. She encouraged David to show Diane how to give medications, how to spot the early signs of an episode, which topics soothed and which unsettled. By mid-September, an uneasy truce had formed, not forgiveness but cooperation grounded in shared purpose. One evening, 3 weeks after Diane's return, they sat together in the sunroom after Eleanor had gone to bed. Diane brought wine, a quiet peace offering, and for the first time they passed the bottle between them, sharing something almost casual. "Can I ask you something?" Diane said to Keisha. "Where did you learn to do all this? It can't just be from caring for your grandmother." Keisha smiled. "You're right. After my grandmother's stroke, when I realized music reached her when nothing else could, I started volunteering at a nursing home in Memphis' Sunset Manor. A lot of residents had dementia. The activities weren't really reaching them, people were just existing." "So you tried something else," David said. "I asked if I could bring my keyboard, started with hymns, most of them grew up in church. Suddenly people who barely responded were singing, crying, alive." She paused. "I did it twice a week for 2 years. Learned which songs accessed which memories, how rhythm could break through when language couldn't." "Why did you stop?" Diane asked. "My grandmother needed more care. 2 more strokes. I moved back with her, got a grocery job because the hours were flexible, took classes when I could afford them." Keisha gestured around the room. "I always meant to go back, until this." David leaned forward. "I meant what I said about funding your education, not as rescuing you, but as an investment. What you're building here is real, it could help thousands." "That's generous," Keisha said carefully, "but it changes the relationship. Right now we're partners in Eleanor's care. You provide space and resources, I bring what I know. If you pay for degrees, I become someone you rescued instead of someone who built something." Diane laughed softly. "I like you, you've got boundaries." She turned to David. "She's right. You solve problems with money. It helps, but it makes things transactional." David winced. "I'm trying to support her,"
and that's good, Diane said gently. Just ask what support she wants. David turned to Keisha. You're right, so what do you want? Keisha looked around the sunroom, thinking of the Tuesday sessions that had grown from 3 people to 6, of notebooks filled with observations. I want to build something real, a place where people with dementia feel human again, where families learn how to reach their loved ones. This house has given me a laboratory. That's more valuable than tuition money. So what's next? Diane asked. I don't know yet, Keisha admitted, but I'm learning to trust the process. 6 months ago I was bagging groceries, now I'm doing work that matters. The next step will show itself. David nodded, understanding at last that Keisha wasn't someone to manage. Fair enough, when you're ready we're here. Diane met his eyes. We are. They finished the wine in comfortable silence, 3 people who had been strangers weeks ago, now bound by shared purpose, beginning to look like family. That weekend something unprecedented happened. Eleanor woke Saturday morning with a clarity no one had seen in years. She knew exactly who and where she was, asked thoughtful questions about the news, even teased David about his terrible taste in ties. By Sunday she was offering him business advice, analyzing risks and market trends with the same sharp insight that had once defined her career. They seized every moment, afraid to waste a second. Diane brought her sons, Eleanor's grandsons, for a visit. Daniel Jr., 22 and studying law at Georgetown, had inherited his grandmother's gift for argument. Ryan, 19, was a sophomore at Howard University, studying music education. They hadn't seen their grandmother truly present in over 2 years. Daniel stood in the doorway of the sunroom and cried when she looked at him and said, "There's my handsome lawyer. Going to change the world, just like your grandmother did." "Grandma," Daniel said softly, holding her hand, "I want to be a civil rights attorney, like you." Eleanor beamed. "That's my boy. This country still needs people willing to fight for justice. Remember, the law isn't about winning arguments, it's about protecting people who can't protect themselves." She turned to Ryan. "And you, sweet thing?" "Music education," Ryan said. "I want to teach in underserved communities, give kids music the way I was given it." Eleanor's gaze shifted to Keisha, standing quietly nearby. "That's your influence," she said. "Ryan told me about the Tuesday sessions, about what you're building. You showed him what music can do." Keisha swallowed hard. "He inspires me right back. Both of them do." That evening, they shared a family dinner, the first real one in years. Rosa cooked Eleanor's favorites, and they used the good china that hadn't been touched since before the diagnosis. Eleanor held court like she always had, telling stories from her legal career that made everyone laugh and cry, cases won, battles fought, young lawyers she'd mentored who had gone on to become judges. At one point she reached across the table and took Keisha's hand, her grip firm. "Thank you," Eleanor said clearly, meeting her eyes, "for giving me back my family, for teaching them how to reach me when I'm lost in the fog, for creating a place where we could find each other again." Tears filled Keisha's eyes. "It's been my honor, Mama Eleanor. Every day. You know what I think," Eleanor continued. "I think you were meant to walk into that grocery store on that exact day, meant to find us when we were falling apart and didn't know how to hold together. Some people call it coincidence, I call it grace." The table fell silent. David looked at Keisha, and felt the rightness of her presence, not as an employee but as something chosen. And for the first time in 3 years since the diagnosis and the slow acceptance of losing his mother inch by inch, David felt something other than grinding grief. He felt hope, not hope that the disease would reverse, but hope that the time they had left could still be full of meaning. That even in loss there could be joy, connection, and moments that would endure long after this weekend faded into memory. But Monday morning, the clarity was gone as suddenly as it had appeared. Eleanor woke confused and frightened, calling for her long-dead mother, unable to remember where she was or why strangers were in her house. The weekend had been a gift, but gifts like that were temporary, and the crash afterward was always brutal. Keisha found David standing in Eleanor's doorway, watching Rosa try to calm his mother. His face was hollow with fresh loss, with the cruel whiplash of having glimpsed who she'd been and then having it taken away again. "It's cruel," he said quietly, "to give us those 2 perfect days and then take them back. It's worse somehow than never having them at all. Or maybe, Keisha said, slipping her hand into his without thinking. It was a reminder of who she still is beneath the disease. Of what we're fighting for. He squeezed her hand tightly. How do you stay so strong? How do you watch this every day and not break? I'm not strong, she said gently. I just show up. There's a difference. David began to understand that showing up again and again, knowing you couldn't fix it, was its own kind of strength. Maybe the most honest kind there was. The following weeks tested them all. Eleanor's episodes of aggression increased, fear turning into fight. She lashed out physically when confused, threw objects, screamed at imagined persecutors. David hired additional caregivers to rotate with Patricia. Medical supplies spread through the house. Emergency protocols appeared on walls. The home felt less like a sanctuary and more like a care facility, but Eleanor would only reliably calm for Keisha. Only Keisha's voice could cut through the terror. Only her songs could pull Eleanor back when reality shattered. It was exhausting. Keisha lived on call, sleeping in clothes she could move in, her phone always within reach. The Tuesday sessions continued. She couldn't bear to cancel them, but she was running on empty, fueled by coffee and determination. Her health began to slip. She lost weight, skipped meals. Dark circles formed beneath her eyes. Her hands developed a slight tremor from stress and caffeine. David noticed. So did Diane. One afternoon in late September, Diane found Keisha asleep on the sunroom couch, still in yesterday's clothes, her phone clutched in her hand. You're burning out, Diane said quietly. You can't keep doing this. Keisha jolted awake. Is Eleanor okay? She's fine. Patricia's with her, but you're not. Diane's voice softened. When was the last time you took a real day off? I don't need D. Yes you do. David's too close to see it, too dependent on you to risk suggesting it. Diane met her eyes. You matter too, Keisha. You can't pour from an empty cup. Keisha wanted to argue, but she was too tired. The truth was, she'd been running on fumes for weeks. Her old life, the grocery store, her classes, her apartment, felt unreal. Friends had stopped inviting her places. Even her grandmother called less, sensing the strain. There was only this house now. This family, this endless cycle of crises and brief victories. I don't know how to step back, Keisha admitted. What if she needs me and I'm not here? Then one of the other caregivers helps her. That's why they're here. Diane's tone was gentle but firm. You can't be everything to her. And it's not fair to you, or to David who's leaning on you for more than care. The words landed heavily. Keisha had felt it too, the way David looked to her for reassurance, for strength he couldn't summon himself. I'll talk to him, Diane said. We need boundaries, time off. But you have to promise me something. What? That when we give you that time, you actually take it. You unplug. Can you promise me that? Keisha nodded slowly, exhaustion winning out. Okay, I promise. That evening, after Eleanor had been settled for the night, David called a meeting. He, Diane and Keisha sat in his study with the door closed, and for once David looked uncertain, vulnerable in a way he rarely allowed himself to be. We need to talk about what happens next, he said. Dr. Phillips called with the results from Mama's latest evaluation. Her decline is accelerating faster than we'd hoped. He's recommending we start preparing for the final stages, hospice care, either here or at a facility. No facility, Keisha said immediately. Eleanor asked to stay home. On her good days, when she could still say what she wanted, she begged us not to send her away. We can't break that promise. We might not have a choice, David said gently. If she becomes a danger to herself, if her care needs exceed what we can safely manage, then we get more help. Keisha cut in. We convert the first floor, bring in hospital-grade equipment, hire round-the-clock nurses, whatever it takes. But we don't send her to die among strangers in some sterile place where they'll sedate her to keep her manageable. The silence that followed was heavy. David's jaw tightened. Keisha, I appreciate your dedication, but this isn't just your decision. She's my mother. Then act like it. The words came out sharp and unfiltered. Stop treating this like a business problem. She's not a failing division or a quarterly report. She's a human being who deserves to die with dignity, in the home she loves, surrounded by people who actually know her. That's not fair, isn't it? You're already planning her exit strategy, emotionally checking out so it hurts less later. But she's still here, David, still having moments of joy and connection. And as long as she is, we should be fighting too, not giving up because it's hard or inconvenient. I have never once stopped. Diane's voice cut through them both. Both of you. She took a breath. We're all scared and exhausted, and fighting each other doesn't help Mama. She turned to Keisha. You're right that we should honor Mama's wish to stay home as long as possible. But you're also burning yourself out trying to be everything she needs. That's not sustainable. We need more help, better boundaries, than to David. And you're right that we have to prepare for worst-case scenarios, but you are treating this like a corporate problem, instead of a family crisis. Mama needs you emotionally present, not just managing her care from down the hall.
They stood there, raw and silent. Tears streamed down Keisha's face. I'm sorry, she whispered. I shouldn't have said those things. I know you love her. No, David said, his voice breaking. You were right. I have been checking out emotionally, trying to manage instead of feel. He swallowed hard. I'm losing my mother. I don't know how to do this without falling apart. Keisha crossed the room and placed her hands on his shoulders. Then fall apart. You're allowed to grieve while she's still here. You don't have to be strong all the time. David pulled her into a hug and let himself break. Diane joined them, wrapping her arms around both of them, and for several minutes they simply held each other, sharing grief that was too heavy to carry alone. When they finally separated, David wiped his face. Okay, we do this together. We keep Mama home as long as we safely can, and we take care of ourselves too. That means bringing in more help. And Keisha, you take real time off, actual days where you unplug. Keisha nodded. Deal, and he added, turning to Diane, we stop pretending this is something I can control alone. We share the responsibility. I'll be here more, Diane said. My boys are grown, there's nothing keeping me in Austin except habit. I should be here. They sealed it with handshakes that turned into hugs, and for the first time since Diane's return, they felt like a team. The next morning, Keisha woke to find an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a card in David's precise handwriting and a gift certificate to a luxury spa downtown. Take Saturday off, the note read. That's an order. Rosa will drive you. Diane and I have Eleanor covered. If you try to come back early, I'm changing the gate code. You've given us everything. Let us give you this. Mum. Keisha smiled through tears and tucked the card into her journal beside the first card David had given her at Henderson's grocery, the day her life changed. She traced the edges of both, feeling the weight of the journey from stranger to essential, from employee to something dangerously close to family. For the first time in months, she let herself imagine a day not defined by crisis or caregiving. Just Keisha, 26, tired, hopeful, still figuring herself out. Maybe accepting help wasn't weakness, she thought. Maybe it was wisdom. Maybe that was what Eleanor was teaching her even now, that being human meant being finite, vulnerable, and willing to accept grace when it was offered. Saturday arrived with unseasonably cool October air and the promise of a day that belonged only to her. Rosa drove Keisha to the spa, chattering about how the entire household had conspired to make this happen. David rearranging his schedule, Diane canceling a business trip, even Patricia offering extra hours so Keisha could truly unplug. They love you, Rosa said as they pulled up to the sleek building downtown. Not just appreciate you, they love you, your family now. Keisha felt tears sting her eyes. I love them too, that's why it's so hard to step away. That's exactly why you need to, Rosa said gently. Love that drains you dry isn't love, it's martyrdom. Mama Eleanor wouldn't want that for you. The spa was quiet and luxurious, soft lighting, hushed voices, eucalyptus and lavender in the air. Keisha melted into a 90-minute massage, knots loosening where she hadn't known they existed. Her face glowed after a facial. Her hair was washed, styled, admired. For the first time in years she let someone else take care of her. Wrapped in a plush robe, sipping herbal tea in the relaxation room, Keisha tried to remember who she'd been before Eleanor Thompson became the center of her world. It was harder than she expected. She'd given so much of herself to this family, this work, that she'd almost forgotten she was a separate person with her own desires. The thought was freeing and frightening. Her phone rang. A call, not a text. She answered instantly. Is Eleanor okay? She's fine, David said, smiling through his voice. She threw oatmeal at Diane and accused Patricia of being a Russian spy, but otherwise fine. He hesitated. I'm calling about something else. What's that? I want to learn one of her favorite songs, on piano. I was hoping you'd teach me. Warmth spread through Keisha. You want to play for her? You showed me music reaches her when nothing else can. I want that connection too. A pause. Is that strange? That's one of the kindest things I've ever heard. Keisha said softly. I'd love to teach you. It'll be imperfect and beautiful. Good, he said. Now finish relaxing. That's an order. After the call, Keisha sat quietly, smiling at nothing, and she realized something simple and unsettling. She was falling in love with this family. Not romantically, though David sometimes took her breath away, but something deeper. She loved the work of them, the way broken pieces could be gathered and held together through care and patience. It was the most meaningful work she'd ever done, and the most dangerous, because when Eleanor was gone, when the center disappeared, what would remain? She pushed the thought away. That was tomorrow's worry. Today she finished her tea, booked a manicure, and allowed herself to just be Keisha. Not the caregiver, not the bridge, not the miracle worker, just Keisha, learning, slowly, that she could be enough even when she wasn't everything. When she returned that evening, refreshed and glowing from professional pampering, Keisha found the house transformed. Candles lined the hallway, real ones, their flames filling the air with vanilla and cinnamon. Soft instrumental jazz drifted from hidden speakers. The dining table was set with flowers, cloth napkins, and the good china that usually stayed locked away. David met her at the door, looking almost nervous. Welcome back. How was your day? Exactly what I needed, Keisha said, surprised by how human she felt. What's all this? Diane's idea. She said if you had a spa day we should give you a spa evening. Rosa made your favorites, and afterward, if you're not too tired, I was hoping for that piano lesson. I'm never too tired for music, Keisha said, and meant it. Eleanor shuffled into the hallway then, supported by Patricia but moving with purpose. She looked at Keisha and softened. Not with clear recognition but with the deep wordless knowing that this was someone safe. There you are, Eleanor said warmly. I was worried you'd left us. Never, Mama Eleanor, I just took a short break. Good, everyone needs breaks. You worked too hard. Her lucidity flickered in and out like radio static. Someone should tell you to rest more. Someone just did, Keisha said gently, taking Eleanor's arm, feeling how light she'd become. Let's get you to dinner. The meal was easy and unforced, laughter, quiet conversation, moments when Eleanor was present, and moments when she drifted away. No one corrected her, no one pulled her back. They met her where she was, and that made the moments of clarity feel like gifts instead of obligations. After dinner, Diane helped Eleanor get ready for bed, while Keisha and David sat at the piano. The house settled into that rare stillness that comes at the end of a good day. Okay, Keisha said, sitting beside him. Your mother's favorite song is What a Wonderful World. Simple but beautiful. She played first, her fingers moving easily, her voice joining the melody. Music wasn't performance for her, it was language. Then she guided David's hands, showing him the rhythm, the phrasing, how to let the notes breathe. He focused with quiet determination, his playing uneven but sincere. Like this, Keisha said softly, placing her hands over his. Feel the rhythm. Music lives in the space between sounds. They worked for nearly an hour. David never played it perfectly, but that wasn't the point. The effort mattered. Love made itself visible in the trying. Thank you, he said, finally, his hands tired, for everything. You've given us back pieces of ourselves I thought were gone. You've given me purpose, Keisha said. I didn't know work could feel like this, like exactly where I'm meant to be. They sat in silence until Diane called down that Eleanor was asking for them. They climbed the stairs together and found her propped up in bed, small and fragile but content. Sing for me, Eleanor asked, both of you. So they did. David's voice was untrained but earnest, blending with Keisha's clear soprano as they sang Amazing Grace, that hymn about being lost and found, about grace that redeems broken things. Eleanor drifted to sleep with a smile, more peaceful than she'd been in months. They stood in the doorway, unwilling to break the moment. She's leaving us, David whispered. Yes, Keisha said, but not yet, we still have time. How much?
I don't know. Weeks, maybe months, but we'll make it count. He nodded, comforted by her certainty. I'm glad you're here. I don't think I could do this without you. You could, she said gently. You're stronger than you think, but you don't have to do it alone. They stood together in the dim hallway, listening to Eleanor's steady breathing, drawing strength from the shared silence. November arrived early that year, cold fronts shaking the ancient oak trees until golden leaves carpeted the garden. Eleanor's condition worsened steadily, the decline no longer gradual but sudden and steep. Lucid moments became rare as shooting stars, beautiful, brief, impossible to predict or hold. Some days she was a child again, calling for her mama, begging to go home to Birmingham. Other days she was a young lawyer, panicked over briefs and clients who needed her. She rarely recognized David or Diane by name anymore, though she seemed to know they were important, that they belonged in her orbit. But she always knew Keisha, or at least she always knew Keisha was safe. The Tuesday music sessions continued. Though Eleanor participated less, she often fell asleep within minutes or stared into space, unreachable. Yet the others thrived. Word spread, and soon 8 people came regularly. The sunroom filled each Tuesday with sound and connection. Mr. Hawthorne began speaking again, real words, not just humming. His daughter cried every time he said her name. Mrs. Reeves still sang beautifully, her voice untouched by the disease. Carlton learned simple melodies on a small keyboard, his musical memory intact even as everything else crumbled. Keisha began documenting everything with obsessive care. She filled notebooks with observations, which songs accessed which memories, how rhythm affected mood and regulation, how group music deepened engagement, the ideal length of sessions, the importance of environment. She printed medical journal articles, teaching herself the language of neuroscience, slowly recognizing patterns, replicable results that suggested this wasn't luck or intuition alone, but something real. One late November night, David found her in the sunroom near midnight, surrounded by papers, her laptop open to a research database. "What are you doing up?" he asked, though he was awake himself, trying to understand why this works. Keisha said, looking up with tired, excited eyes. Why music accesses memory when nothing else can. Why rhythm regulates emotion. Why group music reaches people in ways individual therapy doesn't. She gestured to her notes. I think I'm building something real. A framework that could help thousands, not just the few who fit in your mother's sunroom. David studied her papers with the same intensity he brought to business plans. Keisha, this is publication worthy. This could change how dementia care is approached. Have you thought about presenting it somewhere? Publishing. I'm a former grocery store worker who plays by ear and dropped out of community college, she said. Old insecurity surfacing. No one's going to take me seriously. They will if you give them something worth taking seriously. David said firmly, and this is worth it. Some of the most important work comes from people in the field, not ivory towers. Keisha looked at her notes and felt that dangerous spark ambition, not for recognition, but for reach, for the chance to help more people than those who gathered on Tuesdays. What if I fail? She asked quietly. Or worse, what if I succeed and lose the hands-on work I love? What if you don't try and spend your life wondering what could have been? David said gently, you have a gift. It would be a tragedy to keep it small out of fear. They sat in the quiet house, surrounded by work that mattered, and Keisha felt something shift. Maybe the next chapter was calling, even if she wasn't ready yet. By December, Eleanor was bedridden more often than not. The family transformed the first-floor bedroom into her primary space, bringing in hospital equipment, a medical bed, oxygen, IV stands, the quiet machinery of managed decline. Round-the-clock nursing care followed, and the house slowly shifted from a home into something closer to a private hospice. Rosa continued cooking Eleanor's favorite foods even though she could barely eat them. Patricia sang old hymns during the long dark hours when Eleanor grew most agitated, her voice blending with Keisha's to form a constant undercurrent of comfort. David cut his work hours drastically, his board finally accepting that his mother was dying and that he intended to be present for it in ways he hadn't always managed when she was still living fully. The board meeting where he announced his decision had been tense. David, we understand this is personal, Caroline, the lead investor had said carefully, but we have 3 major hospital contracts coming up for renewal. These clients expect to deal with you directly. Then they'll adjust, David replied evenly. That's why we promoted Mike to COO. He knows the systems better than I do. It's not the same as having the CEO. My mother is dying. The words landed flat and final. I built this company because she taught me that technology should serve people at their most vulnerable. What kind of person would I be if I couldn't show up for my own mother when she's in hers? Silence followed. Papers were studied. Throats cleared. We have strong systems, David continued, his voice quieter now. Strong leadership. The company doesn't need me micromanaging. It never did. That was my ego talking. What it needs is for me to remember why we do this work in the first place. My mother taught me that. I won't dishonor her by abandoning her now. Caroline nodded slowly. All right, we'll make it work. And they did. David cut his hours to 30 a week, mostly remote, mostly strategic. The company didn't falter. In fact, it ran more smoothly. Decisions happened faster without bottlenecking through him. His leadership team stepped into the space he'd finally given them. Revenue held steady. Client satisfaction improved. The hospital contracts renewed without issue. One evening, listening to Keisha play piano for his mother while reviewing reports at home, David realized the lesson Eleanor had tried to teach him years ago. Real leadership builds systems that function without you. Otherwise you aren't leading, you're trapping yourself. Only now, forced to let go, did he truly understand. Maybe that was her final gift, teaching him that letting go wasn't giving up, that trust mattered more than control, that presence outweighed productivity. Eleanor had been many things: brilliant lawyer, civil rights pioneer, but in the end, her most important work was teaching her son how to be human, and he was done running from that lesson. Diane moved into a guest room permanently, her Austin apartment reduced to a future problem. Her sons visited most weekends, sitting with their grandmother even when she didn't know them, reading aloud, playing her favorite records, simply being there. And Keisha was there through all of it, a steady presence, her voice and hands and fierce refusal to let Eleanor feel alone, creating a net that held them all. On the morning 2025, Eleanor woke with startling clarity, perhaps the last she would have. She knew everyone. She understood everything. She was painfully aware of what was happening. I'm dying, she said calmly, looking at David and Diane. Keisha stood back, giving space, but Eleanor's eyes found her. All of you, come here. I don't have much time like this. They gathered close, David and Diane on either side, Keisha at the foot of the bed, all of them holding some part of her. I'm ready, Eleanor said, her face peaceful despite the tears. I've had a good life, a full one. I fought my battles, loved my people, raised 2 brilliant children. Even if you fight too much, she smiled faintly. I'm ready to be with your father, with Thomas. We're not ready, Diane sobbed, gripping her hand. I know, baby, but that's the deal. We don't get to keep each other forever. We just get the time we're given, and we have to be grateful for that instead of greedy for more. Her gaze shifted to Keisha, sharp and fully present. Come here, sweetheart. Keisha took her hand, feeling how light it was. Thank you, Eleanor said deliberately, for giving me back my music, for teaching my children how to reach me through the fog, for seeing me as a person, not a problem. Tears slid down her cheeks. Your grace, pure undeserved grace. You taught me everything that matters, Keisha whispered, about dignity, about showing up. Promise me something, Eleanor said, tightening her grip. Anything. Don't let this work die with me. Whatever you're building, it's too important. Promise me you'll keep going. I promise, Keisha said through tears. Eleanor looked at her children. Take care of each other. Don't let grief turn you into strangers, and let this woman teach you how to live with full hearts, the way she's taught me how to die with mine still full. The clarity faded by afternoon, but something had shifted. She had said her goodbyes. 3 days later, as Keisha sang Amazing Grace and David and Diane held Eleanor's hands, she took her final breath. The funeral filled Concord Baptist Church. David spoke of integrity and justice. Diane spoke of reconciliation and coming home. And Keisha sang What a Wonderful World, for Eleanor, for the living, for those who fade unseen. The silence afterward was sacred. At the cemetery, David took Keisha's hand. Diane took the other. They stood together, a family formed by care and loss and love. Later, back at the house, Diane asked the question none of them wanted to voice. What happens now? David swallowed. I don't know, but I'm not ready to say goodbye to what we've built. You're not losing me, Keisha said. Neither am I, Diane added. We're family now. That doesn't end. They spent the next week sorting through Eleanor's things, a process that was both heartbreaking and quietly healing. Letters she'd saved for decades, photographs from every era of her life, awards and recognitions that traced the arc of a woman who had lived fiercely, loved deeply, and fought well. They cried and laughed and told stories, choosing to remember Eleanor not as she'd been at the end, but as she'd been in her fullness, brilliant and sharp-witted and unapologetically herself. The Tuesday music sessions continued. Keisha couldn't bring herself to cancel them. The participants needed the rhythm, the familiarity, the sense that something stable still existed in a world that kept shrinking. Mr. Hawthorne asked, quietly, if the program would keep going. His face held the fragile hope of someone afraid that the one good thing left to him might disappear. Yes, Keisha heard herself say with a certainty she didn't yet feel. It'll keep going. I promise, but she didn't know how. Eleanor's house belonged to David now, and she couldn't expect him to keep opening it to the constant reminder of illness and loss. If the work was going to survive, it needed its own home, its own future. The answer came from Diane. 2 weeks after Eleanor's death, Diane arrived one gray Tuesday afternoon with rolled architectural plans under her arm, and a look that suggested she'd been carrying a secret. Remember that old community center on Commerce Street? She asked, spreading the plans across the dining table. The one that's been vacant for years. David studied the drawings, interest flickering across his face. I bought it, Diane said simply. Silence fell. You what? David said. I bought it, with my divorce settlement. Money that's been sitting in an account, doing nothing but reminding me of everything that went wrong. She tapped the plans, and I'm giving it to Keisha. Keisha's breath caught. Diane, I can't. This is too much. It's not enough, Diane said firmly. Mama made me promise to take care of you, to make sure this work continued. This is how I keep that promise. She turned to David. You handle funding and long-term sustainability. I'll manage operations and partnerships. And you, she looked at Keisha, you do what you were meant to do. Create music. Teach others. Build something that outlasts all of us. David was already thinking aloud about permits and contractors, square footage and timelines. Grief, slowly, was transforming into purpose. 6 months later, on a warm September afternoon, the Eleanor Thompson Center for Music and Memory opened its doors. The building was bright and welcoming, restored with care. Sunlight poured through tall windows. The walls were painted in the same soft colors Eleanor had loved. Therapy rooms branched off from a central performance space where a Steinway grand piano stood, donated by a family who credited those early Tuesday sessions with giving their father 6 more months of meaningful life. A bronze plaque hung near the entrance, in memory of Eleanor Thompson, mother, pioneer. She taught us that even when memory fades, love remains. Keisha stood in the main room on opening day, surrounded by staff she had hired and trained, musicians, caregivers, social workers, who believed as she did that dementia care was about dignity and connection. 50 participants filled the space. Some lived with dementia. Others were family members, learning how to stay present even as memory slipped away. Mr. Hawthorne was there, tambourine in hand. Mrs. Reeves sang softly. Carlton played careful chords on the keyboard. David and Diane stood beside Keisha, watching Eleanor's legacy take shape. Mama would be proud, Diane whispered. She would, David said. Then he turned to Keisha. Thank you, for saving my mother, for saving us. You saved me too, Keisha said. You gave me purpose. You showed me that small things, a song, a touch, showing up, can change everything. She sat at the piano and began to play, What a Wonderful World. Slowly others joined in. Voices were imperfect, rhythms wobbled, but the music was real. Ryan Thompson, Eleanor's grandson, now studying music education, played alongside her. He changed his academic focus to music therapy, inspired by his grandmother and by Keisha. As the room filled with sound and connection, Keisha understood something she hadn't fully grasped before. Eleanor hadn't just given her a job that day in the grocery store. She had given her a calling. The music swelled and Keisha knew this was only the beginning. There were countless people like Eleanor, frightened, forgotten, waiting to be reached. Now there was a place for them. A sanctuary built on the belief that music could heal, that compassion mattered more than credentials, and that love expressed through small daily acts of care was the most powerful force of all.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.